Thank you, Brad, for agreeing to do this interview. I'm really glad to be here. And so I'll start out with my first question,
Sure.
which is, so what's your story? And just right from where you grew up till how you're sitting here in Singapore today.
That's my story. How did I end up in Singapore? It's interesting that I ended up in Singapore. I don't know if I told you that story, but I was teaching Russian at Ohio State as a graduate student because I had majored in Russian language and literature. And after I studied in Moscow, I had an existential crisis about my future and about my career, because I'd always thought of myself as possibly teaching Russian literature in the university. So I was in a PhD. I was in a graduate program for Russian lit. But after studying in Moscow, I really questioned whether or not that was really what I wanted to do. Of course, I was like most students. I had just gone through my undergraduate career and then went to grad school and hadn't really had a chance to take a break. But after being in Moscow and traveling in Europe, actually, after Moscow for about 6 weeks, I realized that there was so much more to the world than Russian literature, even though it was fascinating and interesting. I realized that maybe I could do something else. And I think that's when I realized one of the reasons I had studied Russian literature and Russian language in particular is just because I was interested in Europe, and I was interested in European civilization. So having had a chance to travel in Europe, I realized I didn't have to actually keep a focus on Russian in order to embrace a better understanding of the world and in European civilization. So I went to speak to my advisor, my teaching advisor, and I told him, about my reservations. And he said, you've studied Russian all these years, and you've got a really deep background in literature and the humanities, and I also had studied French, I'd studied German, and he said, you could teach English anywhere in the world, and that might allow you to achieve bigger goals. And I said, really? You think I could teach English? He said, of course you could teach English. You understand English, you understand language, you understand linguistics, you understand grammar, you have an interest in people. Sure you could. So that was what was really, he really got me to think, why Russian and why not something that I'm even more in tune with, which is English language, right? And then he said, are there any places you would like to go? I said, yeah, Jerry. His name was Jerry. Yeah, Jerry. There's so many places I'd love to go. And he said, pick a spot. Where do you see yourself? 5 years, 10 years? I said, well, how about Singapore? And that was in 1979.
Wow. Okay.
That was in 1979 when I was a grad student. And I ended up, after that talk with him, I quit graduate school. I moved to Europe with a backpack. I ended up living in Portugal for 3 years, and I think I told you that I taught English. I got a job with General Motors, teaching communication, business communication, and that really kind of expanded my horizons. It's like, wow, look at the world of communication. It's so broad. It's not just language. It's everything connected with language and also effective interactions, interpersonal interactions, intercultural interactions. So that was a defining moment. For a person from a small town. I mean, up until that point, I'd been kind of the normal American college student. I'd left my hometown. I'd gone to the university. I'd, met people from different backgrounds, and all of that was really enlightening. But I think that moment, talking to that particular professor, and him asking me questions and prodding me into this idea that I could teach English, that was big. That was a defining moment. And then that experience in Portugal, and I learned Portuguese. I had studied Portuguese for a semester at the university, and that was a good basis. And then I went to Portugal, and I was really hungry to learn the language. So I spent every day reading. I would read the newspaper in English, and then I'd read comparable articles in Portuguese. And I watched telenovelas, Portuguese telenovelas. And then I had a Portuguese girlfriend who spoke no English. So that was all good. you know, and that was really but that was the time when I realized it was so interesting to travel and so interesting to meet people from different backgrounds. And it also was a time when I was questioning the United States and a lot of my basic assumptions, you know, like the economic system, the political system. You know, in America, you're brainwashed growing up there to think it's the best country in the world. You hear that all the time.
Yeah.
It's constant. It's in the media. You hear it from politicians. You hear it from your family. You hear it from your friends.
Oh, we hear it from our friends as well.
You hear it everywhere.
Yeah.
Right? America's the best country in the world. And suddenly there I was in Portugal, and it was like, wow, this country has 1,000 years of statehood. I mean, Portugal had become a nation 1,000 years earlier, right? And they had this rich history and this incredible tradition, and the food was fantastic, and the beaches were beautiful, and the wine was incredible, you know? So so it was suddenly like, you mean America is not the only place?
That's the story of how you got your job at General Motors. It's my favorite story.
Sure. Yeah, that's an interesting experience. I mentioned the elevator. That was kind of my elevator experience, right?
Yeah.
My elevator pitch. And it happened at a party. I was able to deliver my elevator pitch at a party. By that time, I'd gotten a job teaching for the American school, tutoring young engineers for the American school. And I had 3 engineers, I think it was, 2 or 3, I can't remember exactly now, but a couple guys. And they would come to my house once or twice a week for like an hour, just for English conversation. And as I got to know these guys, I found out that there were about 20 young engineers that were being sent out to different places throughout Lisbon during the week to have these conversation lessons. And the purpose was to enhance their English language skills, or especially oral skills, and even reading skills, because most of them were slated to go to the U.S., to the General Motors headquarters in Detroit. So I got to know this, and I found out that they were being sent over the city, and the guys that I had were very, very enthusiastic, very highly motivated, you know, smart dudes.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me, you know, it just seemed like the program was inefficient because, you know, I was teaching them one-on-one, and the other guys in the program were being taught one-on-one, and it seemed to occupy a huge amount of their day. Mm-hmm. Because from the headquarters to my house, which was not so far, it was at least 20 minutes by car. And other guys were driving, I know, at least 45 minutes to go to a tutor's house and then come back. Right. So they'd go all this way, have their lesson, and then go back, and it was occupying their whole morning. So just by chance, I was at a party at the Pinto Teixeira house, and I had a few drinks. Was feeling very bold. And somebody said that one of the gentlemen at the party was the managing director of General Motors. Right. I think he was second in line. He was there was a CEO or something, but this guy was like the managing director. He was very powerful. Somebody said, "Oh, that's the managing director of General Motors over there with his wine," and he was talking to some people. And I thought, interesting. I'd like to talk to him and maybe make my pitch, because I had thought about it earlier and thought I could teach that whole program. I could teach all these guys. Yep. So, you know, I went up to him, and he was probably in his 50s at the time, and I was 25, 26. Yeah. And he didn't notice me, I think. Maybe I was kind of intruding, but I said, "Hi, my name's Brad Blackstone, and you know, I heard that you're the managing director of GM," and he seemed to, you know, it was kind of like, "Well, yeah, so what? Who are you?" Yeah. And then I said, "And I'm tutoring GM employees a couple times a week," and that, you know, pricked his interest. But then I said, and actually the program that they've set up is very inefficient. And that really caught his interest when I said that. The minute I stated that problem, I can still remember this 30 years later. Yeah. That he was, you know, he was kind of taken aback that I would say that. And he asked, why? Why do you say that? And I said, well, you know, you're sending 15 or 20 guys out throughout Lisbon a couple mornings a week. They're all driving, you know, and they're going to see 10, 15 different tutors. you could have one person that came to the headquarters and teach them all. And it just seems a lot more efficient to me.
Yeah.
And he said, come out to my office on Monday morning.
Yeah.
So I did. And by that time, of course, I had thought about it and arranged kind of a plan of teaching. So I had like 2 different levels, like advanced and kind of intermediate. And then I thought about the curriculum. I thought about what I could teach at the different levels. Yeah. And he was impressed. In fact, I met with him and I met with the Human Resources Director.
Right.
And that was pre-PowerPoint. So I didn't have any slides. I didn't have any visuals. It was all talking.
Right.
I just sat in his office and told him what I thought I could do. But for the advanced guys, I thought, I could teach them presentation skills. And he liked the idea. So that ended up being my job that was in the spring of 80 through the summer of 1982. So basically 2 years.
Yeah, 2 years.
It was a great job.
Okay.
So that was my elevator pitch.
Right.
And it was through that experience, that was it was a fantastic experience because I learned so much about business. I learned about the needs of this multinational corporation just by being around the guys. Yeah. And finding out what sort, and I think they were all men. I might have had one woman in 2.5 years, just to show how sexist it was at the time. Yeah. Yeah. But so that was great. That was a good experience, and that's why I later, when I went back to graduate school, in fact, I focused on business English. Even as a grad student, that was my focus. Right. Even though I was teaching writing to students ESL students at Ohio State as a grad student. But I wrote a couple papers on business English, and needs analysis, and those kind of things.
Yeah. Okay. So what would you say is your inspiration, Brad? So it's something like you started off with literature and you stumbled onto English teaching, you found out that you had a flair for that, and then to business English, right? Yeah. So it's sort of like different things fell into place and you chose different things, and you wouldn't say that when you began this was your passion.
I always liked teaching, even when I was teaching Russian.
Right.
The minute I started teaching, I enjoyed it. There was just something about, even though when I first started teaching, my students were my age. I was a graduate student, 22 years old. The students in my class were 19, 20, 21. So it was, it was kind of hip. It was kind of cool being the teacher.
What do you think drew you to it? I mean, for
it was
this
just interacting with people. It was just the people. Yeah, it was. Well, there was 2 things. It was the lifestyle. I liked being in the university as a student. I always liked being in a learning environment. So that was one thing. Yeah. And suddenly being the teacher and not the student was cool. You know, even though I was the age of my students. It was the interactions. Yeah. I remember my first class. I can still remember this. Yeah. That was 1978. Yeah, I can remember walking into the class. Of course, I was a bit intimidated because it was my first class. Yeah. And it was basic Russian. And I remember walking in and sitting in the front row. There were a few students in the classroom already. And just sitting down in the front row like I was a student too. And everybody walked in. I had my books. Yeah. And I remember then standing up in front of the class, and saying something in Russian, Dobry utro or something, good morning. Yeah. People were students were like looking at me like, what's this fool doing? Yeah. What is he standing up talking for? Right? And then I introduced myself and explained, what I was doing there. And they were blown away. They were so shocked. Okay. I mean, of course, they were my peers, right? But it was a charge. I always loved it. I loved, I was a grad student at the same time, and I didn't really. I was interested in literature because I was interested in the human element of what we would read. The stories. I was always interested in stories. But the linguistics part, I wasn't. I had to take courses like Old Slavonic, linguistics, Russian linguistics, and that part I wasn't interested in. I was always interested in the human element, the interaction. Right.
And now, I know that your recent interest is social network,
social media,
social media interaction, which has been the core for your inspiration, right?
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, even something like blogging. I mean, the reason that I'm interested in blogging because it allows students not just to get my feedback, but to get classmates' feedback. And I'm just nosy. I'm kind of nosy.
Yeah.
It's like
you want to know what's going on.
I want to know what's happening.
Yeah.
It's like watching their interaction. You know, it's so cool.
Yeah.
To see how people respond to each other. And
Okay.
I find that fascinating, and I find it in the Facebook too.
Right. Yeah.
You know how people respond to each other.
Yeah.
So when you write something and you get feedback, it's always interesting. I mean, I'm crazy enough that I read it all. I read all the feedback. It's not just like I'm reading your posts. I read what people say to you too.
Yeah.
And I find it's a great way for people to develop skills.
Right.
You know, to get that feedback and also to give it. Right.
I think one thing that Rohan, E.B. and me, the three of us have found this interesting. You know, whenever we spoke about you, we're like, Brad's so charismatic. How does he do it? You know, he's one of the. I mean, all three of us are from NUS, and for all three of us, you're among there. You know, we remember you as the teacher who really felt like he was glad to be in the class.
Really?
Yeah. Have you ever felt there is a difference in approach in what you do as to what your peers do or something? Have you felt it?
You know, I haven't. I mean, I have done lots of visits to other teachers' classes, not just here at NUS, but previously. And you know, I think in some ways people are born to teach, like they're born to play baseball or they're born to be musicians. But if you boil it down to what makes a person like that, I think it's just whether or not they have an interest, an authentic interest in other human beings. Right. I mean, for me, it's not a magic formula. It's just that I'm truly interested. When you walk into the class, it's interesting for me to meet you and find out about you and find out about what you need and where you hope to go and what you hope to do. And if I can be part of that experience and get paid for it, so much the better. You know? Yeah. So I think you have to have an interest in other people. You know, maybe nurses are the same. You know, I think I have a sister that's a nurse, and she loves her job. And I think the part that she loves, I mean, we've had talks about this, she likes interacting with patients. You know, she just loves to find out who they are and what makes them tick and what they want and what are their hopes and what are their dreams. Yeah. And she loves helping them get better. You know, she just digs that. And I think for me it's the same thing. It's, you know, when I walk into a class, especially if I buy into the material that's being taught, or I believe into the course objectives, then, you know, it's very satisfying.
Okay, can you tell us about Radio Mocha? How
Radio
did it
Mocha,
start?
interesting.
It's your music side that we know of.
Right, Radio Mocha. Well, I mean, for years I played music. I actually had a band, right? I was in a band called the Blackstone Blues Band.
Okay.
Yeah, so I did that for years and years, and but it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to be a functioning musician.
Oh, what did you do in the band?
I played harmonica, blues harp, and did backup singing and played percussion, things like that, and wrote music also, and organized. You know, I think the thing that takes a lot of time is organizing gigs. Yeah. I also, when I was in Japan for about 7 years, I produced a music festival in affiliation with the university where I was. And that was a heck of a lot of work. You know, putting together the festival, just organizing things, getting funding, you know, arranging the bands to play, working out the schedule, getting the sound man. Yeah. You know, it was a hell of a lot of work. And when I came to Singapore, I realized that my job here really is demanding too. It's really going to be impossible. And I think I kind of lost interest in. I mean, to perform on stage takes a lot of energy too. You really have to get psyched up. And I was never. I mean, I'm outgoing, and I don't have difficulty. I'm not shy really. Yeah. But to perform on stage takes a tremendous amount of energy. I'd be exhausted after playing 20 songs, you know, and spending the whole night out. Okay. So when I came here, I just thought, I'm going to shift my focus. I'm not going to do that anymore. And but I still love music, and I've always loved music from everywhere, all types of music, whether it's classical, Indian classical, or rock and roll or electronica. I mean, there's so much music that interests me. Yeah. So I met a guy living in my condo complex. He was actually a student at NUS. He was a French. Okay. He's French, and he was doing a undergraduate exchange program, just like the students in our class, right? He was here with his fiance, and we became friends. We met at the swimming pool in my condo, and we got chatting, and then I went over to their place for dinner. They came over to my place for dinner, and he saw all my CDs, because I've been ever since I was a student, I was a fanatic about buying music. Okay. Just nuts, crazy, spending my last 10 cents on a new LP or a new CD, right? So I've got in my study, I've got like 3 walls filled with CDs. And he was looking at it, it's like, wow, you've got so much music here. Yeah. And he was checking it out, I had reggae, and I had hip-hop, and I had classical, and I had this and that. And then he told me, he said, I've got, how much music do you have here? And I said, I don't know, 2,000 CDs or something like that. And he said, I have 2,000 also on my computer. So he had like the equivalent, but he had it on his Mac, right? And he said, are you uploading? I said, yeah, I'm constantly uploading. So maybe I had at that time 100 CDs uploaded. And so we shared music. We shared music. And finally he said it was his dream to start a radio station, internet radio station. I said, well, that's so cool. And he said, would you be interested in being part of that? I said, yeah, I'd love that, because it would answer that need for me to keep my foot in the music, but not have to go perform and everything. So that was about when was that? It was about 2 years ago, I guess. I think he left. I think he left NUS about 2 years ago. Yeah. Right. And he went back to Paris and found a platform, how to set it up, and we made arrangements. We set up a Dropbox, where I could park music, and then, and he talked about my interest in blogging too, because he had read my blog, and he said, would it be cool? He said, would it be okay with you if you wrote like a blog post every time you have a program? I said, sure, I can do that, even though it's become a tremendous headache. So that's how it started. We started at the swimming pool talking and networking, right? We just network and sharing a common interest. But for me, the bigger thing in the music is that I think that in the media, you have a focus on pop music. Pop music is disproportionately showcased, and there's so much fantastic music in the world, And the sad thing is, American music, or Anglo-American music, is so disproportionately highlighted. At least,
I mean, I got introduced to music through pop music as well. Yeah. So.
And most people do. I mean, when I was growing up, the only music I listened to was American pop, American rock and roll, or British. And then I found out that you've got this you've got great traditions of music everywhere. Yeah. So that's what I really started getting into kind of world music, probably, I don't know, 30 years ago, probably when I was in Portugal. Okay. In Portugal, I finally found out about fado. They have this great traditional guitar-based music called fado. And then from there I went to like gypsy music, and from there into North African music, music from Algeria called Rai, and music played on the oud, and then you kind of trace gypsy music. It goes all the way back to Rajasthan. You can find the roots of gypsy music in Rajasthan, folk music from Rajasthan. So all these kind of connections in music satisfied my curiosity and my kind of anthropological self, seeing how things evolve over time, and music is such a happy thing. Yeah. There's so much to be depressed about in the world, but music is something that basically cheers us up, even when the music is sad. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So that's how I got into it. And that's where that Mocha is. And so it's a bi-weekly program. Yeah. Right. I mean, that's specifically my program. Of course, I share music for the general program as well. Right. Because Mocha broadcasts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Right. But the so-called the Daddy Pete Espresso, which is my program, is an hour and a half bi-weekly program.
Okay. So Brad, I'm at my final question now.
Sure.
So, what would you say is one thing or a couple of things that you've learned in your life that you want to share with young people? Just it could be anything about anything at all.
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that question because I just got a Facebook message this morning from my 26-year-old daughter, my oldest daughter.
Right.
And she's very, how should I say it? She's very hard fast in her opinions. She has an opinion. When she has an opinion, it's like, this is my opinion and I'm not going to deviate. Okay. And it's hard to sway her from an opinion.
Right.
And I think at this age, probably, my feeling is that I don't take my opinions so seriously. Okay, I have opinions about Barack Obama, as being a very positive force in America, but it wouldn't surprise me tomorrow to find out that he's a complete fake. Yeah. And I would be willing to accept that, if that's true. Yeah. Right? So if I make an opinion, if I give an opinion, I don't think I can so strongly adhere to any position. My stance is not fixed. Right. I can be swayed. Yeah. And I'm not sure if that's a question of age. Certainly my age. I mean, I think when I was younger I was more resolute in my views. Yeah. But at this point in life I'm not so resolute. Yeah. Okay. So that's one thing I would share. Okay. Keep your mind open. Right? Yeah. The thing I would say is, at this point in my life, I've realized that it never hurts to embrace the unknown. Right. Even if something seems intimidating, maybe it's not as intimidating as it seems. Yeah. So I oftentimes nowadays within CLC, for example, I sign up for projects that everybody else is hesitant to sign up for, because I think, well, at face value, maybe it does seem like it's going to be a lot of work, but what you find out is that you learn so much from something that the work becomes secondary, that you can become enthusiastic about the ideas. Okay. So just recently I signed up for this teacher training program in Thailand, and people were saying, why would you sign up for that? You just did teacher training in Laos. Why are you getting yourself into another project? Again, it comes back to the people. I know I'm going to meet interesting people. Yeah. I'm slated to work with 6 different teachers at 2 different colleges in the southern part of Thailand, and I just think, wow, I'm going to meet some new people. Yeah. Possible friends, right? So I'm not intimidated about jumping into things. Maybe 30 years ago I would have been. Of course, here's a guy that left the graduate program and took a backpack and moved to Europe. So maybe not. Maybe it's programmed in my genes, right? Yeah, yeah. But I'd say embrace challenges. Okay. Jump into the unknown. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Brad. That was very useful. You're welcome.